Greetings and salutations, all of my fellow American sovereigns. This is the Vocational Science Freedom Saturday Night Civics and Sovereignty class. And tonight, the title is The Broiling of We the Frogs, the March Towards Total World Slavery Quickens. So tonight, we're going to cover a few of the ways that people end up giving away their substantive rights, usually by trading them for privileges. And then towards the end of class, we're going to get into how the digital slavery system, slavery 3.0, if you will, is ramping up, and talk about some of the corporations that are in the middle of this mix and what you can do to remove yourself from being part of it. So to start, the picture that I found tonight, I thought was fairly informative. It seems like everybody is just on their phones 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're literally just watching the world burn and not caring one single iota about it, not realizing that they're going to be in the fire too, and that they're going to be the one that's going to be broiled. Now, of course, the whole theme, the broiling of we the frogs, is obviously a play on words. The old adage of that you can't throw frogs directly into boiling water, they'll just jump out because they realize that they're being killed. What you have to do is you have to put a bunch of frogs into lukewarm water and then slowly turn up the heat until they boil. And the frogs won't jump out because they don't realize that they're being boiled. Well, we the American people have been boiled for quite a while, and they're about to just take us out of the pot and stick us directly under the broiler to get that nice little char before they decide to consume all of the rest of the world. So to start, how have we as sovereign people waived our rights in exchange for privileges? Well, there's several different ways. So tonight, I'm just going to count 4 of the ways. The 5th one will kind of be the understanding of how we do it by contract and how the corporate state invades our privacy. But we'll get to that towards the end. We have given up our ability to pay debts in gold and silver by using fake, worthless fiat currency created by the Luciferian cabal, global bankers. And this was done when they brought in their Federal Reserve System in 1913. It wasn't until much later that a particular court case came along after Nixon dropped the gold standard, wherein all of this just became absolute worthless fiat and wasn't backed by anything. So the court case is the Credit River decision. It's First National Bank of Montgomery versus Jerome Daly. And I'd like to read a little bit of this case so that everybody understands that our money is one of the first things that got stolen from us. And of course, it was done so by central banking, obviously. And the whole entire slow boiling of the frog when it comes to how they've done this is something that a lot of people are not even aware of. Like, most people don't even realize that we're using fake money to run this economy. And because we don't pay our debts, meaning that nothing is actually truly paid, the problem is that we're continuing to wander around thinking that we're actually paying for things when we're not. We're just discharging our debt. We're not actually paying for it. And therein lies the problem. If we were actually paying for our debts, then we would have the right to own the things that we're paying for. But because we're not using gold and silver, instead we're using worthless fiat currency, the problem is that nothing ever gets paid. So to bring up the case, I'll show you guys some of what it said in Jerome Daly. So this case happened all the way back in, I believe it was 1968. And this was a case wherein it was after Nixon dropped the gold standard off the money. So this man, Jerome Daly, who I believe was an attorney, but had the wherewithal to realize that, okay, Nixon, if you're going to drop the gold standard, well, guess what? That means that the banks aren't actually lending me anything. Nothing of absolute substance, nothing of consideration. And consideration is the word in law, which conveys some aspect of value. So in the judgment and decree, so the above entitled action came on before the court of a jury of 12 on December 7th, 1968. And plaintiff appeared by its president, Lawrence V. Morgan, who was represented by its counsel, R. Melby. Defendant appeared on his own behalf. So a jury was called, impaneled, and sworn in to try the issue of the case. So Lawrence V. Morgan was the only witness called for plaintiff, and defendant testified as the only witness in his own behalf. Notice that it's a Morgan that actually came and testified for the bank. Okay, so defendant appeared and answered that the plaintiff created the money and credit upon its own books by bookkeeping entry as the consideration for the note and the mortgage of May 8th, 1964, and alleged failure of the consideration for the mortgage deed, and alleged that the sheriff's sale passed no title to plaintiff. So they had a sheriff's sale, right? They went through foreclosure, so on and so forth, the bank did, and wanted to come and get Daly's house. And he said, well, no, you don't have the right to do that. So the issues were tried to the jury were whether there was a lawful consideration and whether defendant had waived his rights to complain about the consideration having been paid on the note for almost 3 years, which I guess they kind of, in a sense, have a point with that. But the problem is there's a little maxim in law regarding fraud. And the maxim states that fraud negates all. So it doesn't really matter how long he was technically, quote unquote, paying on the note. If it was fraud from the beginning, it negates everything. So Mr. Morgan admitted, meaning the bank, admitted that all of the money or credit, which was used as a consideration, was created upon their books. That this was a standard banking practice exercised by their bank in combination with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, another private bank. Further, that he knew of no United States statute or law that gave the plaintiff the authority to do this. Plaintiff further claimed that defendant, by using the ledger book, created credit, and by paying on the note and mortgage, waived any right to complain about the consideration, and that defendant was stopped from doing so. So then the jury returned a unanimous verdict for the defendant, meaning Jerome Daly. And now, therefore, by virtue of the authority vested in me pursuant to the Declaration of Independence, and this is kind of odd because I don't know if this would have actually been stated in court. It's always been kind of a confusion to me. Usually they don't state things like this when a jury lays down a verdict. But anyway, so on and so forth. Okay, so it is hereby ordered, adjudged, and decreed. All right, 1, the plaintiff, meaning the bank, is not entitled to recover the possession of Lot 19, Fairview Beach, Scott County, Minnesota, according to the plat thereof, on file in the Register of Deeds office. 2, that because of failure of a lawful consideration, the note and mortgage, dated May 8th, 1964, are null and void. 3, that the sheriff's sale of the above described premises, held on June 26, 1967, is null and void, of no effect. 4, that the plaintiff has no right, meaning the bank, has no right or interest in said premises or lien thereon, as is above described. 5, that any portion of the Minnesota Constitution and any Minnesota statute binding the jurisdiction of this court is repugnant to the Constitution of the United States and to the Bill of Rights of the Minnesota Constitution, and is null and void, and that this court has jurisdiction to render complete justice in the cause. I don't know if the bank tried to bring up some aspect of jurisdiction. I don't know, but it just goes to the fact that this is basically a federal issue, that under the federal Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, it states that no state shall, and then there's a long laundry list, but one of the things is no state shall make anything but gold and silver a tender in payment of debt. So even though it was a private bank doing this, the jury still said, no, you can't do that. You can't make something else a tender in payment of debt. And I believe that's the aspect of why this might have been brought up. Okay, so to continue. So the memorandum. The issue of this case were simple. There was no material dispute of the facts for the jury to resolve. So basically, it was just a matter of law. So plaintiff admitted that in combination with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, which are, for all practical purposes, because of their interlocking activity and practices, and both being banking institutions incorporated under the laws of the United States, are in the law to be treated as one and the same bank, did create the entire 14,000 in money or credit upon its own books by bookkeeping entry. So imagine that. Back in 1968, that was how much you could buy a house for. That this was the consideration used to support the note, dated May 8th, 1964, and the mortgage of the same date. The money and credit first came into existence when they created it. That's an important point. And that's exactly what it says in Modern Money Mechanics, which is a private, it's not a secret book, but it's definitely a private internal book for the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve clearly states that that's how they create the credit. They just put it onto their books because somebody promised to pay it back. So Mr. Morgan admitted that no United States statute law exists which gave him the right to do this. A lawful consideration must exist and be tendered to support the note. See Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company versus Emma Mason, which is another Minnesota case dealing with lawful consideration. The jury found that there was no consideration, and I agree. I being the judge talking here. Only God can create something of value out of nothing. That was the famous line of the judge, who, by the way, was later killed for this, as were several of the jury members. But to continue. Even if defendant could be charged with waiver or estoppel as a matter of law, this is no defense to the plaintiff. The law leaves wrongdoers where it finds them. Again, this is an aspect of fraud. Fraud negates everything. And that's also another maxim of law, that the law leaves wrongdoers where it finds them. And acts of fraud do not become valid over passage of time. That's another good point to all of this. So to continue, no action will lie to recover on a claim based upon, or in any manner depending upon, a fraudulent, illegal, or immoral transaction or contract to which plaintiff was a party. Right. Can't uphold unlawful contracts, everyone. Plaintiff's act of creating credit is not authorized by the Constitution and laws of the United States. Clearly, as I said, Article 1, Section 10, is unconstitutional and void, and is not a lawful consideration in the eyes of the law to support anything or upon which any lawful right can be built, meaning the taking back of the house. Nothing in the Constitution of the United States limits the jurisdiction of this court, which is one of original jurisdiction with right of trial by jury guaranteed. This is a common law action. I want to make a specific point of that. The judge said this is a common law action. Okay? So at law, meaning in courts of record, you can file things like this. This is the only place where you would have standing to do this. If you were to wander into an equity court or a chancery court, they would throw it out because they don't care. Only at law can you stand upon your substantive rights to say, no, Federal Reserve notes don't have any lawful consideration. Okay, so just I'm making a point of that everyone knows that, in case anybody wants to try this, right? Minnesota cannot limit or impair the power of this court to render complete justice between the parties, meaning the state. Any provisions in the Constitution and laws of Minnesota which attempt to do so is repugnant to the Constitution of the United States and void. Why is that? It's because this is a court of record and this is a jury verdict. This is a general verdict by a jury at law, meaning there's no higher court than this. So no question as to the jurisdiction of this court was raised by either party at the trial. And even if they had, it wouldn't have made any difference anyway. Both parties were given complete liberty to submit any and all facts to the jury, at least insofar as they saw fit. No complaint was made by the plaintiff that plaintiff did not receive a fair trial. From the admissions made by Mr. Morgan, the path of duty was direct and clear for the jury. Their verdict could not reasonably been otherwise. Justice was rendered completely and without denial, promptly and without delay, freely and without purchase, conformable to the laws in this district of December 7th, 1968. So that's the Credit River decision. It says that Federal Reserve notes have no lawful consideration. Now, if anybody would like to look farther into the Credit River decision, I placed several other documents, including a lot of the things that were filed into the court during this case, into the mega file, which everybody can download and will be in the show notes. Okay, so that's the Credit River decision. Now, that's one way, one single way, wherein we've decided by our own volition to give up our rights. But Jerome Daly didn't. He said, no, I don't think so. So we have given up the ability to hold our own courts of record because we think that attorneys and judges have some kind of authority over us. They don't. Jerome Daly knew this. And to make a point about this, notice the Virginia Bill of Rights, which states, 1, that all men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, meaning those that come after them, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. 2, and this is the important one regarding courts of record and regarding what magistrates are supposed to be doing when they're actually holding court. And that is that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people. Semicolon. That magistrates and their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. So the magistrates are the trustees and servants of the people, and at all times amenable to them. So when you hold a court of record at law, the magistrate is supposed to go along with what you're doing because it's your court. It's not their court. But everybody wanders into these inferior courts not of record in which they give up their rights, in which basically they don't have any rights in that forum of court to begin with, because it's all based in contract. And this is what the attorney has done. They've gotten everybody to magically enter into contracts in which then they end up binding themselves into a situation of which they have basically waived their rights by contract. And a lot of people don't realize this. They're not understanding how their rights are being taken away because it's a presumption. The presumptions that they're using in these courts not of record are not something that people are aware of. And a lot of people will go in and say, well, this is a violation of my constitutionally protected rights. And these special administrators will say things like, the Constitution doesn't have any validity in this court. That's something that I've heard magistrates and, well, not a magistrate. I always want to call them special administrators because these people, so quote unquote judges, the black robe priests of hell that are sitting up on the bench, they realize that the Constitution has no validity there because it's all contractual. Now, if you were in a court of record, as Jerome Daly was, that would be different. But you're not, because you've gone in there by contract. And these contracts create situations wherein you've agreed by that contract to enter into an inferior court. And that, by definition, is called a nisi prius court. It's a court by former agreement that you've agreed to enter into these inferior courts and have punishment thereunder. And it's all by contract. Okay. And then the third article of the Virginia Bill of Rights, that government is, or ought to be, instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, of all the various modes and forms of government that is best, which is capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety, and is most effectually secured against the dangers of maladministration. I think we've certainly seen our fill of maladministration as of late. And that whenever any government shall be found inadequate or contrary to these purposes, a majority of the community hath an indubitable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it. Notice how strong the Virginia Bill of Rights is? Well, you have to remember who wrote it. Thomas Jefferson. Same guy who ran the committee for the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, he added a few extra words into the Virginia Bill of Rights because that sentence is very much akin to the one that is in the Declaration of Independence, but I find this one to be a little bit stronger. To continue, in such manner as shall be judged most conductive to the public welfare. So, indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it. Also an unalienable right to do the same. So we always have the right to alter or abolish any of this absolute fuckery that we're being subjected to. Next one, we have exchanged the right to travel for the privilege of driving on the roads and highways that belong to us. Notice the following case. Complete freedom of the highways is so old and well established a blessing that we have forgotten the days of the robber barons and toll roads. And yet, under an act like this, and this was referring to the Washington statutes regarding traffic, arbitrarily administered, the highways may be completely monopolized if, through lack of interest, the people submit. Then they may look to see the most sacred of their liberties taken from them one by more or less rapid encroachment. Those were the words from a judge in the case Robertson versus Department of Public Works, and that's a Washington case and is still good case law if one were to use it in a court of record. And to continue on this point, another case, Chicago Motor Coach versus Chicago. This is Boone versus Clark and several others. So, quote, the use of the highway for the purpose of travel and transportation is not a mere privilege, but a common fundamental right of which the public and individuals cannot rightfully be deprived. Okay. So again, how are we being deprived of this thing that's clearly a right? You're waiving it by contract. Another case, quote, the right of the citizen to travel upon the highway and to transport his property thereon in the ordinary course of life and business differs radically and obviously from that of one who makes the highway his place of business and uses it for private gain in the running of a stagecoach or omnibus, and you could continue and say, or taxi, or semi-truck, or whatever, right? Anything that deals with making money on the roadways. The former is the usual and ordinary right of the citizen, meaning to travel, a right common to all, where the latter, using the roadways as a place of business, is special, unusual, and extraordinary. So, if we have a right, how are we denied the same? It's because you are making an election to exchange your right to travel for a privilege to do business on the roads and highways. In short, you begged for a license, and in doing so, bound yourself to their inferior statutes that regulate commerce. That's what you're doing. Now, we're all told when we get into high school, around the age of 16, oh, you get to go take driver's ed. You get to go learn how to go get yourself a license. Uh-huh. Did any of those teachers in driver's ed class ever explain to you that it's a license for using the roadways as a place of business? No, of course not. Everybody's expected to go and get this license. And if you don't go and get this license, there's something wrong with you. You're a bad boy, right? So, on to the fourth and perhaps the most important right that we have waived, and usually normally without your knowing. And this is your absolute right to privacy. So this right is protected from government intrusion and trespass within the state and the federal bills of rights. So Amendment 4 of the Federal Bill of Rights is your right to be left alone. It states, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects means your car, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue. Now, do any land pirates on the side of the road ever have a warrant? No. They come up with an unlawful reason, which doesn't exist, and lie about it, and say, oh, I smell alcohol, or oh, I smell weed, oh, I see something in your back seat. Okay, you didn't have any reason to pull me over if I wasn't operating in commerce to begin with, asshole. So what are you doing here? I don't have any contracts with you. I don't have any business with you. You're just a land pirate looking to make money for your private for-profit corporation. But anyway, I digress. Back to the fourth. But, okay, so, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause. Okay, what's your probable cause? You don't have any. You don't have any reasonable, articulate suspicion. And furthermore, even if you did have, you'd have to go get a warrant to then search me or my car. You don't get to just decide that you have the power to create a warrant on the side of the road. You filthy pig. You don't. Never have. Furthermore, traffic infractions in pretty much every state I've ever seen are not arrestable offenses anyway. So what are you doing? Oh, I see what you're doing. You're looking for contracts so that you can have jurisdiction over me because I waived it when I signed the contract. Right. Anyway, so no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. When did you give your oath or affirmation to a magistrate who has a proper evidentiary hearing to create said warrant of commitment and who has filed on public record a valid oath of office and their bond? When did you do that? Oh, that's right. You didn't do that. You're just operating on what? On contract again. So supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Can't seize me when I'm exercising my right to travel. Can't seize my car if I haven't registered it. So, how do we end up waiving the right to privacy under the fourth? Simple. You entered into a contract with the corporate state or another corporation, which waived that right by agreement. I talked about this before. When it comes to private corporations, that's usually in the form of what's called a user end license agreement. So you get onto Odyssey, you get onto Rumble, you get onto YouTube, you get onto whatever social media platform or video sharing platform that you prefer to use. You have entered into a user end license agreement to do that. Does anybody ever read these things? No, not usually. That's where all of your rights have been waived, are in those contracts. So I highly suggest, just as a bit of homework, go look up a user end license agreement for any bit of software that you happen to be using. Whether you're on Apple or whether you're on a PC, whether you're on a phone, I don't care. They're all available. Let's go look them up. And you're going to be surprised at all of the things that you actually waive within said contract. So, the contracts, licenses, permits, and registration that you enter into bind you to all of the inferior law, all of their inferior rules, and waive your rights that you could have exercised had you not entered into contract with them. Solution. What is it? Remove yourself from all contracts with the corporate state. So, that's how you do that. So you remove yourself from all contracts with the corporations which do not serve you any longer. And this means government or otherwise, right? So how do you do that? Well, first off, you need to correct your status on the public record and rebut all of the presumptions that they now have over you. because of these contracts. So you remove yourself from the contracts, you rebut the presumptions, and you say, hold on, I'm not what you think I am. I'm this over here, I'm not that, even though you think you want to go after that, of which I'm not, right? Namely, being a citizen of the United States under the 14th Amendment, which was never properly ratified. And then that means that you are, quote unquote, under the jurisdiction of Congress. Well, we the people, we the sovereign people of America, are not under the jurisdiction of Congress. We never have been. But anything that you sign, any contract that you enter into with the corporate state, which says a little check mark next to it that says, are you a citizen of the United States? And you check yes, you've just agreed to be under the jurisdiction of Congress. So the only way to properly do this, to get yourself out of these contracts and to correct your status, is with the VSOF status correction documents. The time to do this is now, before they clamp down and lock everyone, including you, into this digital slave system forever. And the following, which I'm going to play, is what is coming soon for all Americans. And I'm going to play a little snippet from the Solari report, which is from Catherine Austin Fitts. And I put the link into Mega Chat if you guys want to click on this and watch it now, because you guys in Mega won't be able to hear it. Everybody on the stream will. So
let me hold it up. So we just published in hard copy David Hughes's marvelous study on Omnivore.
The thing that strikes me about those videos and what Karp and Peter Thiel were saying, and I can't imagine a more stupid, nightmarish scenario than the one they're setting up. Because what they're doing is they are gambling the national security of the country on a single point of failure.
Right. Right.
I see no redundancy here. And in a world where, as the author of that Omnivore booklet stated, and it's a quotation that just leapt off the page at me, and it's been ringing in my head ever since for quite a few days, is that the network itself is weaponized.
Right.
And this,
so what he's referring to by the network, all of your digital data, every single different way that you interact with other people, emails, phones, smartphones, all of it. That's what he's referring to. And also, coming soon to a slavery system near you shall be the use of AI in the perpetuation of all this to levels hitherto before never seen.
This means that they're setting the country up with a single point of failure with some pretty stiff computer cyber networking hacking capabilities in China, in Russia, in India, any country that has a cyber technical sophistication. In other words, we're looking at opportunities for cyber warfare with all of this data collection and artificial intelligence mining. I've mentioned this before, Catherine, and I'm going to again. I go back to that television series called Person of Interest,
right,
where you have two artificial intelligences battling it out against each other and using these networks, and humans are caught in between.
If you look at where technology is going to institute warfare and control one person at a time, you know, I'm always saying control and freedom happens one person at a time.
Right.
And it's not that this technology hasn't, you know, of dealing with people one-on-one hasn't existed.
Right.
You know, for a long time, it's just been very covert. Now it's becoming very economic, very high tech. And as they grow more confident, they come out of the closet.
Right.
And that hubris is part of what makes it fragile, I think.
Yes. Oh, I totally agree. I think they're going to be partially successful in setting up this system, but that's the problem. The system has to be total to be successful, and I don't think they're ever going to get there.
Well, but here's the thing. They're giving away the mandate of heaven too quickly from what I can see, because
Yeah.
if you justify this as a national security tool, but then you just use it as a taking tool for the mafia, and you use it for live streaming genocides,
Yeah.
which are not subtle, then it looks like a whole different thing. And I think you're one of the few people that really understands the fact that the people who do rule the world really believe in slavery. It's
Yeah.
big business.
Yeah, they do. And
Yeah. And not to make too fine a point about that, their entire modus operandi for thousands of years has been slavery of mankind. It started out in hardcore ball and chain physical slavery. And then it morphed into economic slavery and morphed into the aspect of wage slaves, from being a complete slave to you've decided to now be a wage slave to work for them. And then it ramped up into registration and licenses. And now here comes the digital aspect of it. But as they said, and I completely agree, make no mistake about this, their single goal is world slavery. That's their goal.
And the problem that they have is, I go back to my mafia war business. They want to make everybody else slaves, but the problem is all of them want to be the final faction that rules the roost. And they want all their fellow compatriots. Peter Thiel wants Elon Musk to be a slave and vice versa. And that's their problem. That's their problem. It's a house divided, and it's not going to be able to stand. That's
what I call the Midianite thing. The Midianite thing is upon us.
Yeah.
So the digital slavery is growing faster and faster. And the main single corporation that's going to be in the center of all this is Palantir. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, when Spectre brought it up to me, who's a member of the VSOF, and he also has his own platform and is very good at keeping up with current events. He kind of informs me as to what's coming down the pipeline, so I don't have to go out here and constantly, search through Zero Hedge, which I'm looking at right now, and go and look at all these things. I just listen to his show, and then I figure out what's coming down the pipeline. So Palantir is definitely like the next level of absolute slavery. And I'm going to read from this article, an article from June 2nd of this year on Zero Hedge, and it's titled, Trump Admin Tasks Palantir with Expanding U.S. Surveillance State. So the specter of artificial intelligence has cast its shadow over humanity, haunting it with nightmares of a dystopian hellscape under the oppression of a technocratic elite, which may be too formidable to ever defeat. Okay, pause right there. I don't ever go along with this ridiculous defeatist attitude, ever. These quote unquote technocratic elite, they're just human beings. The only reason they're winning is because they're organized and we aren't. They have more knowledge at the moment than we do. They know everything about you, and you know very little to nothing about them. So that difference in knowledge will always end up in a proportional difference in power. So your job is to learn what they're doing, is to learn who they are, is to learn what this war is about, realize that you're in a war, become educated, learn what they're doing, and then learn how to get out of it, okay? So to continue. The inherently exponential growth of AI means that nightmare is becoming a reality even more quickly than anticipated. Its advent brings with it fears over the erosion of social constructs fundamental to humanity. I would say that it's not just the erosion of social constructs, it's the complete dismantling of institutions of mankind which have existed for thousands of years that they just don't want to have to deal with anymore. Like law, particularly the natural law tradition. And they want everything to be an aspect of positive law, which means thou shalt not because I say so. Okay? So its advent brings with it fears of the erosion of social constructs fundamental to humanity. Among those fears is the delirious impact the use of AI-powered technocratic systems in the hands of government will have on civil liberties. Okay, I hate that term, civil liberties. You don't have civil liberties. You have unalienable rights. Governments grant people civil liberties, also known as civil rights, to infants. So as long as you've come of full age, you can handle your own affairs, you don't need their quote unquote civil rights, or even worse of a use of a word, civil liberties. To continue, with the near certainty that AI integration will inevitably strengthen the iron-fisted grip government has over its people. Well, it doesn't have a grip over its people. It has a grip over its infants, which are persons. But anyway, the end game of that technocratic revolution ultimately looks as if it will arrive at tyranny. Right, because that was always the goal. The weight of that proverbial sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of Americans has become ever more apparent following a New York Times report that the Trump administration has tapped Palantir Technologies to use its AI platforms to facilitate the integration of databases across disparate federal agencies. In doing so, the federal government is poised to build a national database capable of wielding unparalleled surveillance powers over American citizens. So, in this perfect dystopia that they wish to create, it is, like the picture suggests, very much like the Lord of the Rings, right? The all-seeing eye that sees everything, can know exactly what you're doing at all times, and can even predict, based upon your metadata, what you may do in the future. And as it says here underneath the picture, in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the word Palantir means to watch over. I did not know that that was even in the book, even though I'd read the books. I didn't recall that word being used, but I find that interesting that they name a corporation of that aspect to watch over, which is exactly what it is. So the New York Times report states that Palantir's influence with the Trump government will be enhanced by virtue of executive orders signed by the president in March, which instructs government agencies to increase interagency data sharing to, quote, eliminate information silos and streamline data collection across all agencies to increase government efficiency and save hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Well, first off, the taxpayer dollars aren't hard-earned, they just steal them. And second off, the Luciferian Jew money cartel just prints them out of nothing anyway. So don't give me this shit about, oh, you're going to use hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And anyway, so the elimination of information silos, that's just another way of saying there'll be one system of which all government agents will have access to, and they'll be able to pull you up and say, oh, here's your social credit score. Here's your criminal record. Here's all the information about you that says, oh, you don't like government very much. Okay, maybe we'll just stick you in a hole somewhere for a while. Anyway, so Foundry, Palantir's data integration analytics platform, already in use by the federal government, will be further incorporated into even more agencies to achieve that goal. So they're already in this Foundry, the data integration and analytics platform. That thing's already being used, right? So the platform is already being used by at least 4 different federal agencies, including the Departments of Defense, Homeland Security, which is a department, in my personal opinion, that shouldn't even exist at all, Health and Human Services, that's the tracking of all the infants, and Education, that's the indoctrination of all the infants. According to DHS spokesman Tricia McClellan, use of that technology is not a new development, right? As Palantir has had contracts with the federal government for over 14 years. Did anybody pay attention to that? Probably not. Building on that history, Palantir has been on the receiving end of over $113 million in government spending since Trump has returned to the White House. The stake that the Trump administration has taken in the Peter Thiel-founded company is only set to increase. A $795 million contract. Palantir was awarded by the Department of Defense to 2 weeks ago. Palantir is also reportedly in negotiations for contracts with the Social Security Administration and the Internal Revenue Service. Right. Another terrifying idea. I will say this. I did learn something, I think it was yesterday. There is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. The next person that's going to be the IRS, what do they call him? I can't remember what the highest guy at the IRS is called. I don't know what title they give themselves. I think it's just director. But anyway, so the new IRS director is a man that at one time was actually interested in dismantling the entire IRS. Now, hopefully that's a good thing. And Spectre and I were talking the other day about, well, maybe this is the time that everybody should make sure that once this guy's in, because I think he's in already, is to make sure to process serve him with your status docs and also process serve him with your Form 56, which is a IRS form that basically we use to appoint the IRS as a trustee of your estate. So you're the executor and the heir. Appoint them the trustee and say, okay, now I get to give you orders. And commissioner, thank you. Yep. Thank you, Aloha. Okay. So IRS commissioner. Billy Long. Thank you again. So that's his name. And so to serve Mr. Billy Long with these documents. Now, the first thing you want to do is fill out your 32 estate EIN number. Now, you can do that online. And then what you get back from the IRS is literally a letter saying that you are the executor. You're now the executor of said estate, which is a good thing to have in your records. I also say it's a good thing to actually put into court cases when they're trying to go after you and you say, hey, wait a second, even the IRS agrees here that I'm the executor. So what are you, the special administrator, doing trying to administer my estate, right? So anyway, you want to get your EIN, your estate EIN first, have the executor letter, and then move forward with the process serving of the VSOF status docs and the Form 56 onto the IRS Commissioner, Billy Long. That's what Spectre and I have been talking about recently. Okay, so anyway, back to the article. So according to government officials, the impetus of Palantir's growing incorporation into federal agencies has been accelerated by the efforts of Elon Musk-led Department of Government Efficiency. Well, we kind of know how that went because obviously this was a while ago, so Doge kind of fell apart. Probably because Musk was probably finding too many things too quickly and nobody wanted to deal with it. So they probably just wanted him to go away, which is kind of what they did to him. Now he's made his own political party, which I thought was kind of funny. So anyway, at least 3 Doge members formerly worked at Palantir, while 2 others had worked at companies funded by Peter Thiel, an investor and founder of Palantir. And then it said it continued in February. Doge exchanged emails with DHS about merging Social Security records kept by immigration officials, highlighting the data sharing gap between federal agencies that prospective integration of Palantir's Foundry platform seeks to rectify. While Doge's mission frames the use of technology provided by Palantir as a tool in quote-unquote cutting down government waste, the premise has been rebuked by some officials within DHS itself. A senior DHS official told the renowned technology publication that the data harvesting, quote, has nothing to do with finding fraud or wasteful spending. They are already cross-referencing immigration with SSA and IRS as well as voter data. Just another reason to go remove yourself off of the voter registration rolls. Because if you do so, you are also removing yourself from one more contract, and you're also saying to them, you, whoever the hell you are, Mr. Corporate State, you do not represent me in any way, shape, or form. I am not a constituent. And if you want to really give yourself a shock, go look up the word constituent and then go look up the word elector, meaning an elector instead of a voter, right? But anyway, just go look up the word constituent if you really want your hair blown back as to what that word actually means. All right, to continue with the article. All right, beyond Doge, Musk, and Thiel having a long-standing relationship, it began when the two merged their separate companies into what became PayPal in 2002, with Musk initially serving as CEO. Thiel would go on to found Palantir in 2003 with $30 million in funding from his venture capital firm, Founders Fund, whose investment portfolio includes companies like Airbnb, DeepMind, Rippling, Facebook, Ramp, Palantir Technologies, SpaceX, so on and so forth. Other than funding from Thiel himself, and this is the interesting part, the only other investment into Palantir in its nascent days was $2 million investment from In-Q-Tel, the venture capital arm of the CIA. Right. You really want the CIA knowing everything that Palantir is going to collect? Well, guess what? They're going to. So, yeah. So, although they're related, okay, so this gets into Musk's relationship, PayPal, so on and so forth, whatever. Don't need to really get into that. Okay, so although the White House has not officially confirmed the New York Times report, the increasing union between Palantir and Trump administration has already been met with ferocious opposition. Yes, I would be one of those in opposition to that. Political opponents and objective privacy advocates alike have already sued in an effort to stop the Trump administration's increased efforts at data collection. So, from what was stated on the Solari report, very much has to do with what Palantir is and what they're doing. And the other thing I did was I just kind of searched through Zero Hedge for other articles regarding Palantir, and then I found this one, which was kind of scary. So this one's from May 28th. So Fannie Mae, the quasi-government financial firm overseen by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, announced a partnership with defense tech company Palantir to detect mortgage fraud using the firm's proprietary technology, which includes some elements of artificial intelligence. Just in case they don't have all of your info. Under the agreement, new mortgage applications would be run through Palantir's technology suite to uncover fraud before they reach Fannie Mae, according to the housing giant's president CEO, Priscilla Darvo, who added that the tech will allow the organization, quote unquote, to see patterns quicker. We're going to be able to identify fraud more proactively as opposed to retroactively. Right. So there's your pitch. There's your bullshit pitch of why we're doing this. Has fuck all to do with that. It has to do with, we want to know how much debt somebody has. We want to know all of the information that they put down onto their mortgage application. What's their job? What's their income? What are they stating their income is? And then we can go and cross-reference that with, IRS files and see if they match up. And if they don't, then we can go audit them. That's the purpose. It has fuck all to do with finding fraud. Absolutely none. So she said during a Wednesday press conference in Washington, D.C., quote, we're going to be able to understand the fraud and stop it in its tracks. And I think over time, this really becomes a deterrent for bad actors because we're creating friction in the system when they do bad things. Right. Mortgage fraud is all based in the banks. The banks are totally engaged in fraud every single time that they sign a mortgage. Hence the reason why I wanted to show you guys the Jerome Daly case before I even got to this article. So anyway, and that doesn't even get into the fraud that they perpetuate through mortgage-backed securities and all of that fuckery. But anyway, what they do with the mortgages is they package them into securities and then they sell them. Okay, problem with that is that they never transfer the note into the REMIC. So what they're quote unquote packaging and then selling to people is complete fraud anyway, which I have other cases about. Because if you do a mortgage audit, you'll find out that they never do this, which is part of the contract that they need to uphold within the mortgage documents themselves. That's something that they say that they will do. Well, they never do it. Okay. So again, simply on that fact that they didn't follow their own side of their contract, you can sue them and then get rid of the mortgage. And I have a few cases which that was actually done. I believe one of them was in Alabama, and I think the other one was either Tennessee or Texas. So anyway, the mortgage fraud it's just fraud. It's what it is. They just perpetuate fraud on its own all the time. All right, to continue. So Fannie Mae has roughly 4.3 trillion in assets, making it a huge target for fraud. So why defraud America when you can go somewhere else that won't buy or implement actual technology that works? Said Palantir CEO. Right. And then this is even more crazy. So going public, question mark. The announcement comes the day after the president, Donald Trump, said he's working on taking Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac public. You want to explain to me how the government can just decide to take these massive mortgage companies and all of a sudden just decide to make them public and do a public offering on them? Where's that allowed? And then, of course, who's going to be the ones that swoop in and buy them all up? I can guarantee it's going to be BlackRock, first off, and God knows who else on the other side of it. Probably Mr. CIA as well, right? So this was rather shocking to me that they're just going to decide to take, Fannie and Freddie public. Like, what? Are you kidding me? So anyway, so that's that one. And then the last little one was just revelation of Epstein investment tied to Peter Thiel adds to growing concerns about Palantir. So basically what happened is that Epstein funneled 40 million into another firm founded by Thiel after literally, again, I don't know what it is with the Lord of the Rings lore, but anyway, some company called Valor Ventures. So according to the report, Epstein made the 40 million contribution to two separate funds managed by Valor Ventures between 2015 and 2016. Since making the contribution, the return on that investment has seen it grow nearly 170 million. That 170 million holding now stands as the single largest asset of the over 200 million still belonging to the Epstein estate, almost 6 years following his supposed demise. So Epstein's previously unknown investment managed by the venture capital firm is far from the first instance of his ties to Thiel. So these guys were fucking buddies. And the other thing that rather pissed me off is that down here it says, despite the funds invested by Valor belonging to the Epstein estate, it is unlikely any of that 170 million will end up in the hands of victims of the disgraced sexual predator. So that's just convenient. So a known pedophile Luciferian Jew puts all this money in and then it grows, but the government isn't going to, right? The attorney isn't going to use the funds in there because, I don't know, that might mess up their assets or something, and actually give them to the victims. So actually, this was the ones so this attorney actually represented Epstein's victims, chastised federal prosecutors for their lack of judgment in failing to pursue civil forfeiture against his estate. Quote, while we are grateful for the government's prosecution of Epstein and Maxwell, the truth is that both before and afterwards, the government was largely asleep at the switch. Right, because the Epstein client list is made up of nothing but them. So they're going to keep the money, not give it to the victims. And that's just par for the course for Luciferian fucks, really. So anyway, that was the 3 articles that I found just really quick looking at Zero Hedge, connecting Palantir to this terrifying technological slavery system 3.0 that they're going to move in very quickly. So again, if you don't want to be part of this, I highly suggest that you understand how you end up giving up your rights by contract, by consent, and even by things, like I said, like your voter registration. All of these things are explained in the VSOF classes, specifically regarding status correction. If you guys want to check those out, they're on Rumble and they're also on Odyssey. You can go to Rumble and go to playlists, or on Odyssey and go to playlists, and then go and listen to the classes. But they're all broken up into basically easily digestible sections. I don't have like 7-hour classes all in one thing. I do them basically 2 or 3 hours at a time, and then I break them up to make sure that everybody can watch them. So the status correction classes are here. They're the first playlist. Unless I add something to it, then it might be moved around a little bit. But anyway, so your status correction classes, reclaim your state and sovereignty. These classes are the ones that you want to watch first. So first, what is sovereignty? Why are you sovereign? How'd you get that? Right? and then how your estates are stolen by fraud at birth. This is a very important class, one that I did a long time ago, but it lays out everything that they do in the beginning at the Foundling Hospital and how you get registered. And then that there are two different kinds of citizen in America. You need to know what they are. State citizenship regarding ex parte nulls is the next one, and so on and so forth. And then it gets down to the status correction classes about how we do this process and why you need to do the process. Okay. So again, you can find those on Rumble, and you can also find them on Odyssey as well within the playlists. So, okay, so that's pretty much all I had for tonight. We got up to the end of time. I will be able to do Wednesday night open roundtable coming this Wednesday. I apologize for the last couple of weeks. I was horribly sick, had a chest and nose thing that I just couldn't talk. So, but I'm better now. And thanks everybody for all of the information that you sent to me regarding how to get better. I appreciate all that always. And I thank everybody for hanging out on Rumble. Not Nerdy, Bianca Zombie, and Honeypot Enjoyer. Good to see you guys over there. And thanks everybody on the VSOF mega server as well. And if you'd like to join the VSOF, it's completely free. Just go to vocationalscienceoffreedom.org and click on the welcome package, and that will bring you to this page, and you can just download the welcome package here. Just fill it out and then email it to me at vsof@protonmail.com with the topic line new VSOF member. And within the welcome package, it'll teach you how to set up Mega, how to get a hold of me on Mega, how to set up your account on Revolt, and then how to join our Revolt server, which is where we regularly on a daily basis exchange information with each other, talk about our cases, and I give updates from everything that's new in the VSOF. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Thank you all for coming again. Hope to see all the rest of you guys on Wednesday. Hope the rest of you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And until I see you guys again, as always, stay safe and stay sovereign.